Well, here we are again. Paul Mackey, Del Packard.
Hi, Paul.
Good to see you. And thank you for clicking on this video. If you have clicked on this, you will be probably already aware that this is taking a bit of a turn from the first videos that we talked about, where we talked about the trilogy of the resort and the acquisition of it in the inheritance, the wedding that took place, and the sale of it. This one is an entirely different book. Tell us about book number 4, Del.
This is a book called Anticipatory Grief, Anticipating the Passing of a Loved One. This is a nonfiction story, a collection of stories from people who have gone through it. When my mom passed away 7 years ago, I was having a really hard time. I was her caregiver there at Ground Zero, and I'm so focused on taking care of her that I didn't understand that I was grieving already.
Yeah.
It was my mom's minister actually that told me that it's called anticipatory grief. It's relatively a new term in the industry, and all that means is that you start grieving before the person passes away. And it's a very different kind of grief that you don't, like, I didn't honestly recognize that it was grief that I was feeling. You have so much more empathy, and like when she finally passed, I had already done most of my grieving. I still grieved after she passed, but it was different from my siblings who only dealt with their grief after the fact.
Yeah.
Because I had dealt with mine in advance and I was there watching her decline every day, you have so much more empathy for someone when you're there like that with them. My mom got her diagnosis at the time. I was doing a course with the Alzheimer's Society on dementia because my mom had got dementia, and I was trying to learn how to deal with the symptoms and issues around that. So she had a couple of students doing their summer placement, and she put them on the task of finding out about anticipatory grief because nobody knew nothing about it. And at that time, they couldn't find anything.
Mm.
So fast forward 5, 6 years later, when I go to write my book, there's still only about 5 books out there on anticipatory grief, and they're very clinical. They're all from medical doctors and that sort of thing. And I didn't want that. I wanted to share stories from other people that have gone through it, hoping that our stories can help someone else that's going to be out there looking for information like I was 7 years ago.
And if we've learned anything about you as a person, you are a storyteller from the first 3 books. And I think stories tend to give us a little bit of an advantage because they're interesting. They're easier to remember. You can build a story upon a story, and it brings in some of the clinical truth. It's not like watching a TV show that's just a documentary where you can hear a story and follow the storyline. And you're right, it is a pretty tough topic. In fact, you and I met a few years ago when I was working at hospice, and you were involved in the volunteer program where you were out helping in homes and helping with bereavement support and that sort of thing. The entire focus at hospice is the imminent death, and there's an anticipation. Grief Before Death, which is a documentary that's done by Health Direct, gives this description. I'm going to read it from my screen over here, so I'm looking away. It says, anticipatory grief, like you said, feelings of grief or loss that are felt before the loss actually happens. And in most cases, particularly for a caregiver, you're not focused on that at all. You're not focused on you at all. You're focused just on the task at hand. And one of the buzzwords when I was at hospice was self-care. And part of the issue is when you're caring for mom, or if you're a spouse caring for your spouse, in the throes of that caregiving, you're so busy caring for them, you forget to take care of yourself. And if you're maternal at all, you're the one who gets to eat last, you're the one who gets to sleep last, and you're the one who doesn't get to eat or sleep at all. And at some point, as a caregiver, if you don't take care of you, then there's nobody taking care of you. All of a sudden, we're going to have 2 people needing help. The caregiver and the person you're caring for, we're going to have to help all of you. And I like the fact that you have kind of taken the step forward and said, you know what, this is something we need to face because it hits you, whether you want to face it or not. Let me ask you this question, and this is tough. Is there a bit of anticipatory grief for the person who is dying? Do you think they're experiencing that?
Yes. My mother and I had some pretty heartfelt conversations about that in the last 5 months of her life. Yeah, for sure.
It's good that you do. One of the stigmas about death is that people clam up and don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And I think part of healthy grieving, even anticipatory grieving, is to start the conversation.
Yes.
And some of those buzzwords, anticipatory grief, self-care, things like that people go, I've never heard of that before. Doesn't mean it didn't exist. It just didn't have a nice title coined to it.
It was my minister who taught me how to get her talking about it.
Yep.
Like,
and healthy for both of you, I would imagine.
right. Very therapeutic for both of us, yeah. Something else too, Paul, that I want to mention before I forget. This book, because I am a hospice volunteer, I have decided to donate $1 from each book to Hospice Quinty in Belleville.
Good for you.
Specifically, yeah. Last year I had a collection box on the table. So between the book sales and the collection box, I've already made it. The first donation was $220.
Wow.
For hospice, yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you and good for them. And if you're not aware, go to hospicequinty.ca. You'll get to understand a little bit of what goes on there. I have family members who say, you talk about death so much, it's so morbid. And you kind of do when you're in that environment. I found it cathartic. I found it healthy to start the conversation, because there's such a stigma about, well, we don't want to talk about that, we'll just brush it under the carpet. And the fact of the matter is, reality hits you and it stares you right in the face. And the more you talk about it, the more you open up dialogue, the more comfortable you are with the topic and the process, I think the better prepared you are to deal with it when life starts dishing out that dealing of cards that you get. A couple more thoughts and then we'll end this video. This book is available on your website. What's the cost of your books, by the way? Something we haven't asked.
This one is $15,
Yep.
and $1 from each one is going to hospice.
Good for you. And they're available on your website, which
On
is
my website,
dolorespackard.ca.
.com.
.com. Well, there, I've given false advertising already. Anyway,
.com, yeah.
It's been great visiting. Thank you for taking the initiative to write something that probably brought back some of your own grief as you wrote. I would imagine there was some of that in there as well.
I had thought that I had dealt with my mother's death quite well when it happened, but when I wrote the book, I realized that no, I really still had issues to walk through.
And people will say, aren't you going to ever get over that? And you go, no, I'm not. We're going to go through it. We're going to process. We evolve. And like I mentioned previously, we are a composite of the influences of others. And when someone passes away who's very, very close to us, who we love dearly, the relationship does not end. The relationship changes. It's not a physical, we go and talk to them, but they still shape us. I quote my dad more now than I ever did, and he's been gone for 8 years. The fact of the matter is, grief is a process, and we are evolving through it, and hopefully not getting over it.
Grief is just trying to figure out what to do with the love that you still have left over when your loved one passes away, and you're trying to find your new normal without them.
Exactly. When you love deep, you hurt deep. Del, thanks so much for spending some time with us. And thank you for clicking on the link. If you have more information, please click at the bottom. You can find the contact button and you can email Dolores. It has been a delight talking to you.
Thank you, Paul.